Hello everybody, this is Rise to Ruins. Now, Rise to Ruins is a really interesting beast because it's actually one of the rare examples of a game that manages to bite off a whole bunch of different pieces of other games and genres and actually manages to pull them all off quite well. That doesn't happen very often. What Rise to Ruins really is a god game and a village sort of management simulation kind of thing, but it also has some other elements to that. It's very much like Dwarf Fortress, in like a kind of basic way. I absolutely adore Dwarf Fortress, but it is of course quite impenetrable to a lot of people. It can be difficult to learn, and this game is not quite that difficult to learn, but I should mention that it definitely has a pretty severe learning curve at different points. That's a good thing though for this sort of game. And it's Dwarf Fortress and a little bit black and white, I would say, and a lot of it something like Populous. So there's a lot of different concepts actually coming together here to form a sort of central whole, and there's even other bits more than that. It's also a little bit tower defense and a bit like real-time strategy, a tiny bit, so there's a ton of stuff here, and obviously with that many moving parts, it can be difficult to actually make something that makes sense. And very impressively, even though it's currently in early access, Rise to Ruins definitely is a very good game in my opinion. It has a lot going for it, and it is also pretty unique. So ostensibly what you do is you actually start on a map, the map of sort of like a giant continent, and there are various little squares that you can choose to start at, and these squares are of course very important for your choice because they involve different kinds of resources and different sorts of difficulties that you'll have to deal with. So choosing one that matches your level of skill, I suppose, is a good idea. That's why I started in a fairly central foresty area, because I figured I'd need lots of wood at first, and well, it's a forest, so there's going to be lots of wood there for me. And I was right about that, although you also need a lot of stone. Luckily this place is somewhat mountainous. And after you actually choose a location, you'll see the map a little bit later, to start in, you can eventually actually get migrants and send the migrants off to any of the other directly connected, the actual adjacent other squares on the map, and you can expand from there, and you can in fact attempt to take over the entire continent if you wish. Although there are some difficulties with that we'll get into a little bit later. So once you begin, you will of course have your little bitty village center that you must plop down and actually start growing outward from there, and you actually have full control over where you want to start, not only in terms of which square of the world you want to start in, but within that square what actual point you would like to begin, which is pretty cool. You'll obviously want to start by looking around and kind of making a choice on what areas have different kinds of resources in fairly easy reach, and try and start a village in a place where, you know, your people aren't going to have to go all over the place just to get some basic supplies. Lots of trees, lots of stone if you can, lots of crystal, although that's not as important at first, and lots of water, most definitely. And the actual simulation of the village and the villagers as it goes in this game is really pretty complex. They all have individual names and needs, and if you just click on one of them, you'll see that they all have their own individual like meters for happiness and hunger and thirst and things like that. They're pretty much each like their own little Sims, and you got to take care of them. And you'll start with a very low population, of course, but as you go throughout the game, you'll eventually get nomads coming through that if they actually make it to your village alive, they will join you. And of course, there's also the idea that male and female villagers can make babies, naturally. And children can't really work for you at first, naturally speaking, because, you know, child labor laws, but if you allow them to grow up successfully, then they will actually become adults and up the village population. Now, there are, of course, as I mentioned before, god game elements to this, and that is mostly in the form of the fact that you are not just a passive watcher of the world, you have powers. You are a cursor that can control various things, everything from just simply picking something up and moving it across the map, say a skeleton that's trying to kill one of your dogs, to some resources on the ground that you want to help to sort of build a building a little quicker, so you can, you know, help out directly by dropping some resources on the building, to things like calling down meteors, lightning strikes, summoning storms, which is a fantastic song, by the way, and even simple things like getting resources to grow back. You can actually sort of motivate the land, is what it's called, and it can grow back crops and trees and stuff as long as there's something left behind for it to actually grow from. And you have an influence bar, that sort of blue bar at the top, that is basically like your mana, and you can only cast these various spells if you have enough influence to do so. You will start with a pretty low amount of influence, and the maximum amount you can regenerate up to is determined by the size of your village. So as you get more and more people, you'll become more and more powerful as a deity, which makes sense because you'll basically have more followers. So more power directly results from that. Very black and white-ish right there. And you can, your essence is sort of spread throughout the world. There is essence that you can just hover your cursor near and it will actually be absorbed into your cursor and regenerate some of your influence. There's also various buildings that can generate essence, but bear in mind that you are not the only being that needs it. There are magical buildings that do actually need essence to operate. Things like towers that fire out elemental bolts or lightning at people and other things that just require essence to operate. So you have to sort of carefully generate it sometimes. Dead enemies actually generate essence, as well as burning garbage and all sorts of other things that you can sort of get an essence flow going and actually store it in these wells in your village for either yourself to draw from during a time of emergency or for your various bits that actually need to use it directly. So there is a sort of economy in terms of the magic system and how that actually works, which is pretty cool because they could have just easily made it godly powers and that's it, but it's more like limited godly powers that have a cost that your village also has to pay in its own resources, which is pretty cool actually. All of your villagers, of course, have their own AI, so as you plop building plans down and things for them, they will carry the resources there. Well, first they'll get the resources, and then they'll carry them there to actually begin construction of whatever it is that you have told them to. And this does mean that management of your actual city layout is really important too, because if things are in the way, if things are not laid out in a very organic or kind of flowing way, it can cause longer paths than necessary for your villagers to do what they want to do, whether it be farmers getting food for their crops or people taking processed water from your water processing area to actually distribute it through the farms and through people's homes and the like. It's all connected in terms of a sort of supply chain, and you need this to actually work effectively and efficiently if you want people to, live, and for your village to actually become more desirable for more nomads to keep moving in so you can keep getting more powerful and spreading out. So it's very much a sort of a game of tug of war with the corruption, because as I mentioned, there are some problems with just spreading out as fast as you can, and that is the fact that on the other side of the map from where you start, there will be some corruption growing, and it will start very, very small, just little patches of nonsense that you don't want to deal with, but it will continue day by day to grow larger and larger and actually overtake the entire map if you let it. And as the corruption overtakes things, it can build buildings and gather resources for themselves, the corruption drones, and create cemeteries, or graveyards, and things like that are spawning grounds for enemies. So skeletons and zombies and stuff will actually start coming every night to attack your village, and the larger the corruption gets, the more of these every night you'll have to deal with. So this is sort of where the survival elements come in, because as soon as night falls, things can get pretty hectic in your village. Whatever you were doing at the time is suddenly kind of at risk. If you have builders going through to try and build some sort of wall or to try and build a new building or upgrade something, suddenly their paths are more dangerous because there are monsters that will start to come in and attack them. And they can also destroy your buildings, your walls, and things like that. So the builders can repair stuff. You can repair stuff with a spell, though it's somewhat expensive. And the monsters themselves can also be, of course, kept back by having some barracks with some guards that will patrol various areas, and the more guards you have, of course you'll need things like weapons and armor for them to help them survive longer and make them more effective, but they will go throughout the map and try to keep the corruption at bay a little bit. They will, actually show up at the front lines when monsters appear and help fight them off. And as I mentioned, this game does, of course, have some tower defense elements because you can build towers and you can build walls, and the game actually directly references the idea of mazing, of creating large mazes for monsters to go through that will make it more difficult and take longer for them to actually get to anything of major value for your village, like all the juicy people inside. And you will have to build various towers along these walls to sort of help fight them off. And I'm actually not building a huge maze at first here because this is my first ever village. I'm just sort of exploring how the game works. But I am starting to build some walls because I'm noticing that enemies are coming from a specific direction almost every time. And if I can sort of slow them down a bit, I can place some towers to help actually fight them and support my guards in the sort of front lines fighting off all the evil skellies. And all that kind of culminates in a game that's really, really chill and very relaxing to play, just kind of managing your city and growing slowly, very much in the same feeling that something like City Skylines will give you, just, trying to successfully manage a city. And then suddenly it also is very hectic because of all the defense that you have to do, all the people that you have to keep healthy and keep fed, and all of the eviltons on the border of your village that want to come in and kill the crap out of you. So there's a ton of management to do on pretty much every end of every little bit of supply chain that's there, from basic resources to food to water to actual magical using towers, and towers that use bolts that you have to make, add like a boiler and things like that. It's all, like I said, kind of like Dwarf Fortress. It feels very much like Dwarf Fortress while using Dwarf Therapist to actually help and manage your dwarves a little bit easier. It feels similar to that. It's less complicated, but not by a whole lot, and it is still definitely very, very depthy and quite difficult, but very interesting because of all the mechanics that it has coming together to make something pretty unique. You have to manage the use of your influence, because you may want to, say, try and have the Motivate Land spell ready to cast a couple of times and regrow some of your crops, but that uses a ton of influence, and if it's near nighttime, you may need that influence to help cart around guards to the front line, or to lift enemies into one of those gates over there, those cullis gates, which just disintegrate things and give you essence for it, but don't use them too often, because they can overload. And, or cast spells. It's like, striking some lightning down on the battlefield or casting some magic missiles all over the place. You may need that influence to help defend your village at night, so what you use of it at different times of day, depending on how much you can regenerate it, how quickly, is very important to actually consider. Just like any other resource in the game, which is neat. And it makes for a very interesting experience that is quite demanding on all fronts. It requires a lot of focus, and it requires some, forward planning and things like that, but is very satisfying when things go right, because as you place your buildings, you can of course upgrade them to make them more efficient at whatever they do, and you can create roads, just roadways throughout your village, and eventually it just becomes a really satisfying experience to create all of these things and have it working efficiently and very well, and actually be able to defend it all every night. And it's kind of cool that the corruption spreads, because every night that means is sort of like an additional test. It's not something that you can just have enough defenses for, because you may have been able to repel one, but it's just going to get harder from there. So you can't just forget about it and just, plop a couple of towers down and say that that's it, because it might be for now, but it won't be forever. And very much like something like Dwarf Fortress, you have these various jobs that your villagers can actually do, and you're going to be constantly juggling around your population between different jobs that are currently needed. Maybe you need to make some stone, some cut stone for a building project, so you have some stone cutters. You take maybe a couple of your builders out, or one of your guards for now, because it's daytime, and you change them over to a stone cutter so you can get that done for a while. And you have to sort of manage all of your different people, because you're probably not going to have enough people to actually do everything at like full capacity all the time. It just doesn't work that way. So you're going to have to shuffle people around to different farming jobs, and maybe some making rations in the kitchen, and then maybe have someone switch over to help a wall being built or help maintain your roads for a little while. You're going to be sort of hoping for more people at all times so that you can have more people doing different things at all times. But of course, with more people comes a higher demand on resources, more housing, things like that. So it's a balance that you're constantly sort of teetering on various edges of, trying to strike as best you can in terms of efficiency and keeping needs up and things, it's just a really satisfying experience. Like I said, it's pretty cool. Also, I should mention how many little bitty details are actually in this game. Things like rain, which, by the way, makes the game really relaxing when it's happening, actually making little puddles on the ground, and you can actually see little pixelated raindrops going off of rooftops and things. Even though it's 2D, you can actually tell the direction they're moving and how they're sort of like sliding down the roof and sliding into rain collectors and stuff. You can see how a lot of this stuff works, and it's just little bitty details like that in the artwork and in the world itself that is really cool. Little bits of the terrain, even just square by square, can actually be terraformed by your people. They can dig ditches for water, they can create walls, they can have the towers placed around certain walls, because certain towers are actually tall enough to fire above them. So even though it's top-down 2D, there is a system of depth, and you can actually use shadows cast during daytime to actually see how tall certain things are, which is, like I said, a nice little touch. So overall, I would say that it is a truly engrossing game. It's the kind of game that pulls you in when you say you just want to play it for like an hour or so, and suddenly it's like 4 in the morning and you don't know what happened. It is that sort of game. It's the kind that just keeps you playing to get you, like, you want to get your villagers to the next milestone that you have in mind for them, and you just want to keep doing this over and over to grow bigger and bigger, and you keep getting more and more things that you want to do. And it's one of those games that you can quit for a while and then be excited about what you're going to do the next time. You already have a plan for like the next play session, and I love games like that, and this is absolutely one of those. I should mention, of course, that the developer has said that he doesn't really believe in the idea of paying for DLC, so he has a strict no DRM free update policy. So that's also very pro-consumer, obviously, and a very good thing to hear. Everything that he wants to release for the game, even past the actual early access period when it's fully released, is going to be in the form of free updates, never in paid DLC, so that's something to consider. The game is available right now on Early Access for $15, but due to the summer sale that's going on right now until the 9th at the time of recording, it's actually half off. It's $7.50, and this amount of gameplay, people have had like 400 or 500 hours plus in this game already, because even though it's in early access, there's still a lot to do and a lot being done, and there are like regular unstable branches for you to check out in terms of new content and the like. So it's being very actively developed by a very passionate person, and it has a ton of content and quality already behind it. So if you're into this sort of thing, it's kind of a no-brainer to try it out, because it really is genuinely fantastic. And I'm very, very excited to see what it will actually become by the time the full release actually rolls around, because I think that as good as it is now, once it's actually fully finished, it's going to be super impressive and hopefully be one of those kind of indie darlings that comes out of nowhere for a lot of people and really impresses them and sells very, very well. And with modding support, its longevity will be even longer. So that is Rise to Ruins, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to like it and comment as to why, and if you didn't, basically do the same thing. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.